All right, everyone, it is 11:30. We will go ahead and get started. Welcome to our July Summer Series Lunch and Learn. We are very excited to have Laura Casas Franco with us from Heightened Potential. She's going to share some information about co-regulation in early intervention. This is a part one. So she's going to share some great information with us today, and then she'll be back in August to share a part two. We'll share more information about that in TriStarts. Just a couple of reminders. All the previously recorded Lunch and Learns can be found on the TEIS Community Resource website, and I will put that link in the chat here in just a moment so you can find those previous Lunch and Learns if you're interested in watching those. Please remember to stay muted if you're not already muted during the presentation. And if you have any questions for Laura today, you're welcome to put those into the chat during the presentation, but we will cover those questions at the end. So once she's finished, we'll read through those questions and answer those. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Laura. Thank you for being with us today.
Oh, I am so excited to be here and share some time with you all while we delve into a very, very complex conversation. Co-regulation. I wish we had a year to talk about this because there's just so many little parts of it that take extra thought and research and really just conversation, I feel like, about how we can best support our littles and their families. So we'll delve into part one today, and I hope to see you back in about a month for part two. A little bit about myself. I am an occupational therapist, and I work with Heightened Potential. So we are primarily in Knoxville and the surrounding areas, but we do stretch all the way down towards the southeast, towards Chattanooga. I have my bachelor's in recreation and sports management from Knoxville, from UT, and then I received my master's from Tennessee State University, which is based in Nashville, in occupational therapy. And I've been working in pediatrics my entire career as an occupational therapist, and it's a really wonderful demographic to work with, as I hope you all know and also share the same feelings towards, because there's just so many beautiful challenges that continue to encourage us to seek more and more education like today. So thank you for joining. I received my board certification in pediatrics through the American Occupational Therapy Association because I was itching for more education and more resources to better support our families. And then I also have some other continuing education courses and certifications, such as feeding, hippotherapy, some sensory integration, some very specialized feeding for our littles who are just coming out of the NICU. And if you all have any suggestions for other things to pursue, I love continuing education. So just put that in the chat. I think when it comes to my practice, my biggest goal when I work with families is to make sure that it's family-centered care. So within occupational therapy, you have the opportunity to work in a clinic sometimes, and then you also have the opportunity to work in the natural setting, which is what my company does. So we go into homes and daycares, other community settings that our littles may be in. And so within those contexts, those natural settings, my goal is to make sure that we're able to support the whole family unit, because that's the best way to support the client that we're there for. They don't exist on an island. My goals for today. So I am hoping that we all walk away with a little bit more understanding about co-regulation. We encounter it all the time. There's really not a session that goes by where we're not having to use strategies or discuss co-regulation with families. But I want us to define it and really delve into why is it so important and so foundational to the development of our little ones, and then thinking about those next steps towards self-regulation. We're going to spend just a tiny bit of time talking about the neurobiology of stress and self-regulation, how it all connects, because that's a really big piece that I think we're going to take a tiny bit of time for today, but maybe worth you all delving into independently, because I think it plays a really big role that we don't always think about when it comes to supporting regulation. I like for us to also spend some time talking about behavioral and psychological signs of dysregulation, because some of them are what we expect and some of them are not what what we expect. And so we want to make sure that we are thinking about all these things with our little ones, because there may be some kiddos who are showing us signs that we may not recognize, or the caregivers may struggle to recognize as that connection to dysregulation. So we'll talk about that. And then we're going to touch on the caregiver's role in building regulation capacities. We're going to talk a whole lot more in part 2 coming up in August about strategies and really how to effectively work on co-regulation within that family unit. But we'll delve into it a little bit today. Okay, I want you all to think about a child that you know. This may be a child on your caseload. It may be a child you used to work with. It may be a child in your personal life. Think about them when they are happy, when they're playing and content. How do you know when they become overwhelmed? Is it obvious? Are there signs, oh, this is building up? Or does it seem like just out of nowhere, that child went from seemingly regulated to suddenly very dysregulated or overwhelmed or out of control? Because sometimes those are the things that we see the most, is those out of control behaviors. How do they recover? So they get upset. How do they recover from being upset? Did they do it by themselves? Do they need some support? Does it take a really long time? Is it inconsistent? So does it sometimes depend on why they were upset, or what was going on the rest of the day, or who was around? There's so many factors that impact our ability to regulate, both when we're little and, let's be honest, when we're adults. And those are all things I want you to be thinking about. So it may be the child that you just thought of at the start of this slide, or there may be another child that comes to mind as we're talking throughout this presentation. But think through your caseload, think through those kiddos you know, and the signs that they're showing you of dysregulation, or the ways that they do recover. Because some kiddos on our caseload, they have beautiful co-regulation with their family, and it's great, and it's something to celebrate. And it's something for us to think about when it comes to the other kids. Like, how can we borrow those strategies? Okay, very foundationally, what is co-regulation? Co-regulation is going to be a supportive process. So it's going to take 2 at least for this to succeed. And generally, it's going to be the caregiver and then the child. So the caregiver is going to be there to read the cues that the child is sending, as confusing as they may be. Ideally, they're going to be the ones who are trying to modify the environment. They might be able to help the child through responding sensitively. We're calm, ideally, when we're engaging in co-regulation. We're sensitive to the needs of the other person that we're engaging in the process with. And the ultimate goal is that we can help that child return to being in that optimal state of ready to learn, ready to play, ready to tackle whatever it is that little kiddo needs to do. It's very important to think about the ages that we work with and the developmental ages that we work with here, because we have a wide range in the state of Tennessee of ages. We work with 0 to the August after the 5th birthday, which for some of our friends is almost 6. And so we're going to have a wide variety of ages chronologically and then ages developmentally. So when we talk about ages today, we're thinking developmentally. So chronologically, if a child is 3, they might not developmentally be at the age 3. So think through all of the strategies and the things that we're talking about from that developmental perspective too. So very, very early on, when we're infants, we cannot calm ourselves very well independently. So we kind of rely on caregivers for everything, right? And then we get a little older and think about your 1 to 2, 2.5-year-old little friends. They still require a lot of support, right? To calm when they get upset. And it isn't always predictable the amount of support they're going to need because sometimes they're in that process of learning a little bit how to calm themselves and how to manage frustrations. That whole process is developing through our relationship with the adults around us who provide co-regulation. So when we have repeated, safe, predictable, successful experiences of co-regulation, we're building those blocks towards self-regulation. This is something that comes up a lot with caregivers that we probably will find ourselves needing to provide a little bit of coaching and education on, is that kiddos can't really learn how to self-regulate successfully without that foundation of knowing how to access calm with that partner, so that co-regulation. Also, something that will come up a lot is just the developmental expectations, but we'll touch on that a little bit in that next slide. So, co-regulation, we need a partner, we need a caregiver to help us understand what's going on, whether it's a physical need or an emotional need, whether it's a very identifiable frustrator, or maybe it was just that today was really hard and then my block tower fell over and I'm really sad, right? We need that caregiver to help us make sense of what happened, figure out how to cope with it, and then hopefully go back to that regulated state. So that's co-regulation. Self-regulation is when you are able to manage that process independently. That is typically what our caregivers want from a lot of our littles, and sometimes it's not quite developmentally appropriate. When we're in the typical early intervention stage, we're really thinking that like 0 to 3, majority of our caseloads are 2 to 3-year-olds typically. They're in the throes of needing co-regulation because their brains are going through these massive periods of development, and their prefrontal cortex, or the place that drives all of the decisions that we need to have for self-regulation, it's still developing. It's just not there. They literally cannot access the skill yet. So we are building during this stage those foundational building blocks, but we can't expect them to do it consistently by themselves. Generally, it's going to be between 3 to 7, so approaching school age, as we're able to self-regulate more consistently. But as you all know, think through your friends on your caseload. That does not mean every friend is ready for that at 7. Sometimes we still need to have that support. The beautiful thing about co-regulation is that we as caregivers, because we are caregivers for a certain portion of a child's week in some capacities, but also they're caregivers that they're with all the time. We're able to model behavior for them constantly. And so we're able to really set those foundational skills in place for co-regulation and later self-regulation. Co-regulation is extremely important because, again, we can't develop self-regulation successfully if we don't have a strong history of understanding how to be regulated. So we need co-regulation for self-regulation. We really need it for our social skills, right? And we'll touch on that in a little bit. And then academic readiness. If we're dysregulated, we are not in a state to learn. We are really not. And so when a kiddo goes to school and that caregiver is not there one-on-one, or even in the same capacity that they were maybe in a daycare earlier on, how is that kiddo supposed to learn if they're getting upset throughout the day and they don't know how to self-regulate? So that co-regulation sets the stage for that academic readiness. Okay, laid out a little bit differently because it's so important that we think through this and that we understand how to share this with caregivers. That first year of life, we're not expecting kiddos to self-regulate at all. There is complete dependence pretty much on caregivers for regulation. From 1 to 3, we start to see that expand a little bit. We're seeing some self-soothing. Is it effective? Maybe, but we're starting to see it. But we're still really needing our safe adults to help us to calm. but it's those building blocks, right? So we're setting the stage, building the foundation for then, as we get to preschool and school aged, we're able to internalize those strategies that were modeled for us, and we're able to start to self-regulate. Okay, think through your little friends on your caseload. Think through when they get dysregulated. There's so many different things that can contribute to it. Sometimes it's routines. If you aren't able to stay regulated during the process of your bath routine, or your toothbrushing routine, or your routine of getting up in the morning, getting ready for school, going to your daycare program, it's going to be really hard to participate successfully, right? So regulation impacts our ability to participate in routines. Oftentimes it's a question that we'll see pop up on different sensory assessments within OT, and then also within some other assessments that we use just generally as folks who work with toddlers, is how do they participate in their routines? Because that's a big red flag if we're having issues in our participation, if we're not able to stay regulated. Another way that we oftentimes will see the impact of dysregulation happen is during social interactions. If you have any friends in daycares, or if you have a child who has some siblings, you may have seen this firsthand, how it's hard to build relationships with other kiddos if you're the kiddo that's dysregulated a lot. Because either other kiddos in the class are too hard to spend time with because, they make me feel so upset in my little body. I just can't handle it. So I kind of separate myself from them. And then there's the flip side of it, that kid who is just gung-ho for everything, and the rest of the class does not know what to do with them because their dysregulation impacts the rest of the class. And then the whole class is dysregulated, right? So our social participation really requires us to be calm to a certain extent and regulated. I think something that's really important to think about when it comes to regulation, because I mentioned the word calm. We don't always have to be like calm in that we're sitting down and still and quiet and ready to learn, right? Like if you're on the playground, it's totally appropriate to be running around and happy and screaming and doing whatever it is that you need to do to let out all of that energy. The goal with being regulated is that we're able to choose the appropriate times to have those moments, right? So that that's not happening during circle time. So those are the moments that the child hopefully will learn through co-regulation, and maybe the teachers or classmates even showing them, this is how we access calm in these moments. This is how I participate in class. And then later, that's the appropriate time to let out all of my wild. Executive functioning. So it is important to talk about executive functioning, even though it is not fully developed in our littles. So we cannot expect our 2 to 3-year-olds to have the executive functioning skills like impulse control and attention and flexibility that is required to self-regulate, because developmentally they're just not there. But it's something that we start to see rear its head as a challenge for a lot of our friends in moments where they maybe have to share or take turns or transition or manage change. So even though we don't have those skills yet, the world is still demanding a lot of our emerging ability to have some sort of executive functioning skill. This happens a lot if you think about our friends who are building a tower and the tower crashes down and it was unexpected, and that just, it's too much. They can't handle it, right? So regulation and the process of learning how to calm oneself, it plays a role in being able to access our executive functioning skills, like flexibility or sharing or turn taking. It's also really very critical as a foundational skill for our mental health and resilience if we are regulated. Children who experience early childhood trauma, who maybe have had some things happen that are impacting their mental health, the mental health of their caregivers, they're more likely to have that dysregulation and that lack of resilience. So it's our responsibility to consider all of those things that have happened previously, even if it was years ago, it was as an infant. Those things may be impacting why regulation is hard now. We're going to just touch a little bit on neurobiology because there's not enough time for all of it. But we all know there's so much stuff that is developing during these first few years. It's a really critical window, which is beautiful. It's so exciting that we have the opportunity to work with kiddos and their families during this time. But man, there is a lot of development that is happening. Their little brains are just going. And sometimes this is helpful, and sometimes it can, we can start to get into that stress response a little bit more. And that's where it's less helpful that it's such rapid development. Typically, our brains develop from the brainstem to the little limbic system and then up to the cortex. If we think about a lot of the things that we're asking of our littles when we work with them, we're kind of working on those higher level skills, right? Social skills, communication, problem solving, being able to do hard motor tasks. Those are higher level skills. They're not going to be successful with those when their survival systems are what are driving them. So if we are not regulated, it is going to be so hard to access and be successful in a therapy session because their little brains are just not in a state where they can access learning. I see this happen all the time with kiddos who are working on feeding. Feeding is extremely stressful for some little friends. And if we're asking them to learn about something that is extremely stressful to them, right? Like I see that food, I don't know how to manage the emotions that I have with that food, making me anxious. It shuts down all of the hunger cues and it makes them so worried that they can't then learn about the food. So we have to be regulated when we're coming to these situations where we're being asked to use or to learn some of these higher level skills. We're going to talk just a tiny bit about this polyvagal theory, but I really encourage you to spend some time, dig into it on your own. The more you learn, the more you want to learn. It's fascinating. But it talks about our different nervous system responses. So when something happens, we can respond in a few different ways. We can be relaxed. We can be ready to fight or flee, or we can freeze. And depending on the kiddo that you have in front of you, it might change or it might be consistent. You might have that little friend who, when something happens that makes them upset, they come out swinging. Doesn't matter if it was you that made them upset or the person across the room. If you're the person closest, get ready. But there's also little friends that you just see shut down. And so there's different ways that our bodies are responding to stress. So the polyvagal theory, fascinating. We cannot spend enough time on it today. Look into it. It is very interesting. Stress isn't bad. So as we're going through this, I want you to think about the times that we ask children to experience a little bit of stress. If we're being honest with ourselves, it probably happens a fair amount during therapy sessions because we are trying to work on the family's goals. We are trying to support development. And sometimes that is stressful. Ideally, though, it's going to be positive stress. So a tiny challenge that we're grading and that we're there to support with. So we're there, the caregiver's there as a co-regulator during this short challenge. And that's okay. It's a positive stress. An example of this is if you are trying to help a child learn turn taking, which Can be very stressful for some kiddos, but we're going to select like a short challenge. We're going to help to build their capacity, and we're going to be there to support and co-regulate during that time. We also have some tolerable stress, which is a little bit more significant, but we have a buffer. We have our co-regulators. That reduces the impact of the stressors on us. Ideally, during our therapy sessions, we are not causing tolerable stress, that significant stress, but we have that strong relationship, hopefully, with the kiddo, with the family. So if it happened, you're still able to buffer with support. Sometimes toxic stress happens. So this is going to be more prolonged periods of stress that we just don't have a supportive relationship for. And it could be for a variety of reasons. You may be in a daycare where the caregivers don't understand how to co-regulate or how to support the child in a way that is helpful to them. And so day after day, you're kind of building up that stress. It also may happen with a family that does not have the resources to co-regulate or understand how to co-regulate. And so that kiddo is just going through prolonged periods of stress, and it rewires our brain. We have hormones that change where we're more likely to go into dysregulation because we're lacking that co-regulation foundation. So our relationships are going to protect our little brains that are developing from that more toxic stress, hopefully. Okay, let's talk about what dysregulation could look for. Behavioral signs. Again, this is just a very short list. You all probably have examples of your families and the kiddos that you work with where you know when that child is getting dysregulated, or the caregiver can tell, and no one else who doesn't know the kid could know. So sometimes they're not very obvious. Crying, running away, hitting's the big one. Hands communicate a lot, feet communicate a lot. It tells people, get away from me, stop. It's just not really appropriate, right? Sometimes it's that kid who is just glued to you. This happened to me earlier today. I went into a daycare to see a friend. It's a fantastic classroom, wonderful program. Their understanding of co-regulation makes my heart so happy. And this little friend, he's not on my caseload, but he was so sad. He was so sad. And he did not know me very well. We've only met a few times, and still he was stuck to me like glue. Up, up, which I love. He used his words to communicate that to me too, instead of just throwing himself in my arms. But that clinginess, even sometimes to people that we don't know very well, just because we're trying to find something to ground us. Another behavioral sign, difficulty with transitions. Could also be difficulty with flexibility or difficulty with change. It might manifest as sleep challenges or feeding challenges too. Some of the signs that we might see and observe in their body, their color might change. They might start sweating. Their breathing may change. Oh, those big breaths. Or maybe they're taking shallow breaths. Some little friends will just hold their hands and shake and get so mad. Babies may hold their breath. Yawning. Yawning is not one that you would typically think of immediately as being dysregulated, because we're wired to think yawning is tired. Yawning can mean a whole lot of other things too. My brain is overwhelmed is a big one. So yawning during a challenging task may actually mean I'm feeling a little bit dysregulated. The muscle tone may change. So you might have a kiddo that is getting extremely stiff. I have one that I did an evaluation on last week, and she has a really hard time tolerating position changes. She's about 8 months old, and we're working on rolling. But when it comes to physically helping, she gets very stiff. It's not easy for her to manage that demand of being handled and moved when it comes to it. So her muscle tone gets so tight. But when she's relaxed and engaged and happy and calm, she is not struggling with the same amount of tone. Changes in attention. So you may see a kiddo get really hyperfixated on something, or it might seem like they are all over the place. So there's a lot of different ways dysregulation can present, but generally for our families, it becomes a concern when it impacts their routines. So there may be little ones who are pretty dysregulated, but they're kind of internalizing it. And so you don't see a lot of those outward signs, right? Because their body's in that freeze, they're just shutting down. Those kiddos are less likely to be noted than the ones who have those big behaviors, because it's a whole lot easier to think, I need to take action and we need to do something about this, when you have a child who's throwing shoes at you from across the room. Something that comes up so frequently when a child is dysregulated: tell me what you want. Use your words, right? And it would be great if they could. Oh, it would solve the problem, because then we would understand. But sometimes, even our friends who have beautiful communication, the ability to use words or communication device to tell us what they need when they're regulated, it all goes away when they are dysregulated. Our brain's having some changes, right? So we shift from being calm and relaxed into survival mode, that fight, flight, or freeze. So our priorities are changing from those higher level functionings of being able to talk, being able to learn, being able to process communication is a big one. And so our brain is like, okay, shut all those down. We don't need them. We need to focus on survival right now. And so I like to think of it as a garage door, like one of those ones that you pull the chain and it rolls up. And then you can also sometimes let go of the chain and it just comes slamming down, right? I like to use that as a visual. When we are dysregulated, that garage door comes slamming down, and all we are left with access to is those brainstem and limbic system responses, which are not using words. It is not being rational. It is not listening to you telling me that I shouldn't be doing that, right? The access to those is just gone. And until we are able to calm, until that child is able to access co-regulation and that garage door gets pulled back up, that's when they have access again to those skills that they maybe either have emerging or maybe even already just have foundationally that they can't access. So when we go into that fight, flight, or freeze, that survival mode, you may see a child who's not listening well, who is not following directions. Their words are probably gone, or if they're using them, they're not effective. Yelling, crying, sometimes arguing, hitting, they might run away from you. They might refuse. Do you want a hug? No. Do you want a drink? No. Even if that may have been helpful for them. You also might just see them shut down or become quiet. So communication is something that I think is really helpful for caregivers to understand that child is not going to be accessing until we engage in co-regulation, we help their little body to feel calm, and then to be ready to bring that garage door open so that we can access the things that we maybe are wanting them to access, like what even happened, right? Although I will say, at the ages of 2 to 3, developmentally, they're probably not going to be able to tell you very well. Behavior is great communication, though. I like to have caregivers think about, okay, what is this behavior telling me? Why do we think that happened? Instead of thinking about it as, wow, my child is really trying to be naughty. They're trying to misbehave. Kiddos at this age typically don't understand quite fully my behaviors can manipulate someone else. That's a pretty complex thing. They do understand the connection between behavior and consequence, though. Consequence being just whatever the outcome is. So not necessarily a bad consequence, right? So they understand that connection much more than the emotional manipulation of things. But as adults, when we're viewing a situation, we have that. And so sometimes we accidentally layer that in and we put meaning to things that kiddos are doing that they're not trying to communicate. So that can be really hard, but worthwhile to chat with caregivers about is, okay, what is this child telling me? Let's take some of those assumed things that we're maybe thinking they're manipulating or doing on purpose, and then really just breaking it down into the behavior. So the behavior could be that I'm feeling overwhelmed. Maybe it was asked to do too much today. It was a hard day. My body doesn't feel safe. That one happens sometimes. My body needs movement. Sometimes it comes down to our friends who have different sensory processing needs, and we are asking them to do things like sit still, and that's dysregulating them, and their body needs movement. They also might need connection. So sometimes that behavior is going to come out because they know that they get that response of some sort of adult interaction when they're upset. Then that last one, oh, this expectation is just too hard right now. It may have been okay last week. It may have been okay this morning. Right now, it is just too hard. There are a few different pillars of co-regulation. The biggest one, I think, is just that connection. It's that relationship. So when we're coming in to work with a family and you may tell that there is either a great foundational relationship or maybe a relationship where there's some room for growth. Our goal is to have a nice, strong, connected relationship to build all of the rest of these co-regulation pillars on, because that child is going to be able to feel safe, valued, and secure with a connected and familiar adult, right? So it's going to be harder for a child to co-regulate with a stranger than the person that they have a relationship with. A nice, like, warm and responsive interaction is one of the ways that we can build trust with our little ones, and that feeling of like, I am safe physically and emotionally. I think responsive is one of the best things to focus on from that. We want to make sure that we are responding to what we see in the child. We don't want to have that like bland response that doesn't really like facilitate connection. So when a child is showing us something, they're showing us their cues, whatever they might be, we're going to respond with empathy if we're trying to co-regulate. I think there is some overlap with co-regulation and discipline in a lot of families, and it can be hard to rewrite the expectation on how we as caregivers should be responding to behaviors. But if we are coming at it from the perspective of behavior is communication, the communication is that I am upset, my body is not calm, I am dysregulated, we're going to have much more success when we're responding with empathy and meeting that child where they are, both emotionally and developmentally. Discipline is a really tough thing to try to do with a 2-year-old because there's just not the complex understanding of, I did something wrong, I need to go stand in the corner for 2 minutes. Or I did something wrong and Nana used her hands to tell me that she did not like it through spanking me. Therefore, I should not do this thing again. It's too complex developmentally. So our goal with co-regulation as we're coaching is to help caregivers maybe change or let go of some of their old thoughts when it comes to how to respond when a child is needing co-regulation when they're upset. Because again, it's the behavior that's communicating the dysregulation. So just addressing the behavior with some sort of discipline may not quite fix the situation, right? Because that child is still going to probably be dysregulated and they're probably going to struggle to be successful later in the day. Something that's so big and so hard is being calm and predictable. If you are trying to regulate someone and your body is calm and your reactions are predictable, you're going to have a lot more success than if you respond differently every time that child is upset. You know, sometimes you have big emotions, sometimes you have little emotions, sometimes you scream, sometimes you may use discipline, sometimes you may calm them down, right? Like that predictability is really helpful for a lot of kiddos. Is it easy? Oh, absolutely not. It's so hard. It is so hard to stay calm when a child is screaming in your face. But when we stay calm, we are able to allow that child to borrow our calm. It may take 20 minutes, it may take 30 minutes, it may take all day. If we are calm, they're able to borrow and access that more easily than if we kind of have our emotions all over the place. So we want to be predictable in our routine and our reactions so that that child has some feelings of, okay, something is grounded in my life. Something I can count on is here. Because sometimes that's what's going on, is that there's too much that's unpredictable around them, and they are just in need of some anchor to hold them. And that can be us as the calm and predictable presence. Emotional coaching. What is this big feeling that I have that has made my body feel so terrible, right? If we don't understand that that is called sadness or that that is called frustration, it's going to be a lot harder to then communicate, I feel mad. So we, as we are co-regulating and building these foundational blocks, should spend a little bit of time emotion coaching. This does not mean that in the moment when a child is upset, that they're going to hear you give a long description of whatever the trigger was, whatever the frustration was, and what that emotion means for them. We're going to have to work on that when they are regulated, but we can also label, oh, that tower fell. That was frustrating. Starting to label during the moment, but not going in with the expectation that that's when they're going to learn what the emotion is. But we're pairing it, right? We're building those connections. You can also model strategies for managing feelings. Sometimes it's deep breaths. Although if you have tried to get a tiny human to take deep breaths, it's not always easy, right? So that's where we have to get creative. Maybe it's blowing bubbles. Maybe it's the classroom's routine that they use. Some classes have that language already established, or they're trying to establish it. And then we can also, very, very small thing, kind of model asking for help. But again, they're not learning when they're dysregulated. So that is when they're regulated. For some kiddos, they might need environmental and sensory supports to help them calm. There's a lot of different ways that you can use tools. I will say, when a child is very dysregulated, you are not going to get a weighted vest on them. You are probably not going to be able to have a lot of success with probably most of your sensory tools, let's be honest, because sometimes that requires too much thinking or too much processing. So you might need to calm a little bit and then access some of those tools as well. We as caregivers are the most important intervention when it comes to co-regulation. It's really empowering for caregivers when they realize this, when they have that success. So caregivers are going to be the most important part to any behavior, any modification that you're trying to have to help a child who's dysregulated. So as providers, and we'll talk more about this in the next part, we're going to be working with the caregivers to help them recognize when the child is regulated and dysregulated. We want them to understand why the behavior is happening. A big one, we want to help the caregiver feel confident and ready to respond to stress and big emotions. And part of that is going to be helping the caregiver identify how they need to co-regulate, if needed, or regulate themselves so that they're able to respond to their child. We're going to help the caregivers figure out how to put strategies into their everyday routines so that throughout the day, the child is getting opportunities for co-regulation. And then the ultimate goal, empowering the families so that they are ready to jump in those moments when the child might be upset. Part 2, we're going to talk about strategies. So caregiver strategies, maybe some strategies for our sessions. And then we're going to delve a little bit more into that overlap between regulation, discipline, developmental appropriateness, and what research is saying. We'll talk about some more resources for us as providers for learning and supporting families in this process. So that is coming in part 2, August 14th, less than a month away. I'm going to go ahead and move to questions now. My email address is here on the screen, and I believe they'll also share it as well in the chat. If you all have any questions or want more things covered in the second part as well, feel free to shoot me an email. I love co-regulation. I talk about it all day with you if you want. So feel free now to go ahead and pop your questions into the chat. I am going to take this slide down so that I can look at you and also have access to look at the chat as well.
Thank you so much, Laura. This is such great information. Everyone, I did go ahead and put Laura's email address in the chat, so that way you have access to that. Just as she said, any questions, you're welcome to reach out to her. Such good information, whether you are an early interventionist, a service coordinator, or you just have a child in your life. This is really good info. At the moment, we don't have any questions yet, but we will hang out a couple more minutes. I anticipate some will likely be placed in the chat. So just think about your questions if there are any. Someone did say great presentation. We do have a question here. Do you have any tips to help caregivers remain calm during times of co-regulation?
I think this is a really hard thing for a lot of caregivers, and honestly us, even just adults, to recognize in ourselves sometimes. So taking the time when you are calm as the caregiver to think about, what is it that dysregulates me the most when this child gets upset? Is it the sound? Is it the things that the child does? Is it the shame that I feel when we're at the grocery store and my child has a meltdown? So thinking through those things that make us dysregulated. And then, unfortunately, this is very individualized, so I can't give you like an exact list of or a formula, but taking the time to think about the things that help them feel better. I've had some friends who are very loud when they get upset. And so for those caregivers, putting some earbuds in is really helpful. It could be taking a step back, regulating yourself first, and then coming to regulate too. So it's going to be very personalized depending on the person, but I think it's helpful to figure out, like, what is it that's dysregulating to me about this?
Awesome. Thank you. Another question. For children with neurodevelopmental differences, such as autism or sensory processing challenges, how do you differentiate between behaviors that require co-regulation and those that may be better supported through environmental modifications or sensory interventions? That's a great question, Kayla.
That is a really good question. And I think this oftentimes gets a little bit murky because it depends on why the child is needing co-regulation. So for our friends who are, and it may help if you have a specific child that you're thinking of, like, is it a very busy child where they're just kind of always on the go? That child might need those environmental modifications or access to different sensory interventions, because it's not necessarily that they're dysregulated in a way that, like, I'm mad about something, but it's just my body's not getting the input that I need. I think if a child is dysregulated and they're very busy, they're really having a lot of sensory seeking behaviors, it's possible that they need some co-regulation to identify what to choose to help their body feel better or to feel ready to handle whatever's coming next. I have had a few friends on my caseloads who do not choose the right things when their bodies are looking for a lot of sensory input. And so that co-regulation of an adult recognizing, your body needs a little something different right now. I see that. Let's not spin in a circle 10 times because that winds you up even more, but let's maybe try the swing together, right? So I think there's some overlap between that. And if you want to talk about that further, I'm more than happy to email about it. Because it's kind of it's a complex one because it depends on the kiddo and it depends on what the situation is.
Great. Thank you so much. Stephanie said this was so helpful. Thank you. Hey, Regina, I was aware that LICC meeting may overlap with this a little bit for our August presentation. All of the Lunch and Learns are recorded. So part 2 will also be recorded and it will be available on the TEIS community resource website. So if you're ever not able to attend a Lunch and Learn or attend the full Lunch and Learn, just keep in mind they are all recorded and housed on the TEIS community resource website. So Regina, you will be able to go back and view part 2. Kelly, I have not placed the link for the form stack in the chat just yet. I'll do that in a couple of minutes. So for everyone, that the link for the form stack to provide some feedback and get your confirmation of attendance will go in the chat here momentarily. Let's see. You're very welcome, Regina. Regina said, wonderful, thank you. That was a great reminder. Christy says, thank you as well. And I will go ahead and place that form stack link in. We've got a couple of minutes left. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to put those in the chat. We'll hang out a little bit longer. I am going to go ahead. There was a question about cultural beliefs. Hold on just a second. Did I miss that?
I can read it if you'd like.
Yeah, go ahead. I must have missed that one. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, Kayla asked, when cultural beliefs around emotional expression differ, how do you adapt co-regulation coaching while remaining culturally responsive without compromising evidence-based practice? The first thing that I would delve into there is really building a strong connection with the caregivers that you're working with. I think so often we come into this armed with our research and our knowledge. And it's so important to remember that that family unit comes from their very own experience and their own cultural beliefs. And I think if we look at the foundational aspects of co-regulation, right, that we're trying to be attuned to what's going on in that child's life, we're recognizing cues, that kind of goes cross-culturally. So the suggestions that you make or the strategies that you make for what the caregiver and the child does may shift a little bit, and it will probably require some conversation with that caregiver. So it may take delving into when you were younger and you were experiencing some of these big emotions that you've noticed your child is experiencing, what do you remember being helpful? So almost coaching them through kind of that like reflective practice, because they might start to identify some things that were helpful. And they also may start to identify, my caregivers did this and it was not helpful. And so we can potentially problem solve together to shift towards something that may be different from what they used or are often used in their culture, but may work better for them. You can always have the conversation of how do you feel like the way that we're responding when XYZ kiddo gets upset, how do you feel like that's working? Do you feel like it's helpful? Do you feel stressed? Do you feel like that's something that is working for your family? So I would turn it more towards like, let's have a conversation. Let me hear what you're saying, really reflect on what they're saying. You might have to do some research yourself, on whatever the cultural differences are between the strategies that you've identified and the strategies the families maybe modeled or talked about with you. But I do think it's possible. It's just going to take a little bit more collaboration, which can be hard if they're not ready to really delve into some brutal honesty sometimes.
We have another question from Dawn. If a child is exhibiting behaviors that indicate co-regulation is needed, example, hitting, biting, etc., would you suggest coming back after the child is regulated to address the undesired behavior?
A lot of that is going to depend on the child's developmental age. If we do not have the ability yet to reflect on past events, you can try, but you're probably not going to see change, especially if the child has not developed impulse control yet, right? Like we might have the understanding, mom gets sad when I hit her because mom's told me she gets sad when I hit her. I don't know what that means, right? And we don't have the impulse control yet to not do that thing in the future. So I would say yes, and consider the child's developmental age as you are having that conversation, because you might need to set the expectation first. If it's a kiddo that maybe is able to have that understanding, so say they draw on the wall, you're not supposed to draw on the wall. This is a very basic example. In order for that child to understand we're not supposed to draw on the wall, you have to have a lot of skills in place to stop yourself literally from drawing on the wall, not just because you want to. So if they don't have that skill, they probably don't have that same skill in behavior management as well.
Awesome. Very good. That is all of our questions right now. We have about 5 minutes left. I'll hang out until 12:30. Laura, if you have time to hang out till 12:30, we'll just have that 5 extra minutes if any other questions start to trickle in. Just some reminders for you all. Next month in August, we will have 2 lunch and learns because we will have our typical quarterly lunch and learn, and then we will have Laura's part 2. The part 2 is August 14th. And I know it was already mentioned by Regina, there's a LSCC meeting that may overlap with this. So if you are not able to attend, please be aware you can review the presentation on the TEIS Community Resource website after the fact if you're not able to make it. And then on August 26th, we will have Catherine from TN Step, who has given us wonderful presentations in the past. She'll be back to share some great information with us. There will be more info coming out in TriStarts and staff update about those presentations and what you can expect. Always the same time, 11:30 to 12:30. I appreciate you all joining us today. This has been such great information, wonderful reminders. So we really thank you, Laura. We appreciate your time, and we're looking forward to next month as well. All right, about 3 minutes till. We do have one final question, I think, from Kayla. How do you teach balance between co-regulation and allowing developmentally appropriate frustration that builds self-regulation skills over time, especially as early intervention is dealing with parents that unintentionally reinforce dysregulation? Kayla, you're doing so good with these questions today.
You must have some very dysregulated little friends on your caseload. I think this goes back to our thought on having that tolerable stress or the positive stress, where I see that you said I do have a lot of those little dysregulated friends. So if we are able to understand the signs that that kiddo is showing us, and it may take some trial and error, I'm not going to lie. You may hit that wall a few times and go, okay, that is our threshold. That's about how much we can handle. You will probably want to build some co-regulation in. So starting really small, taking breaks. And breaks don't have to be like a sensory break or something where it's like really elaborate. Breaks could just be singing a song together. It could be playing in the way that is familiar to that child for a little bit. For the parent aspect of it, I would probably take a step back to education if it's possible. It may take modeling and reflecting. Some caregivers are not quite at the point where they are ready to learn and reflect on things that happened in the past as well, kind of familiar what we were just talking about with our little friends. But if you can talk about, why do you think they got frustrated? And like kind of facilitate the conversation. And then talking about how when a behavior happens, it's the communication, how sometimes the consequence or the way that we respond can actually reinforce that too over time. It may help a little bit. I can't take enough time to answer that question. I apologize because it's just really complicated. So if you want, feel free to email and we can chat about that. But we will talk more about strategies in part 2. So we're going to spend a lot more time on that. So if there's a specific example of something you want to talk through, send me an email. We can talk about it in part 2.
Yes, perfect. And there is one more question from Jeannie. Jeannie, if you don't mind, since it is 12:29, we'll close out here in 1 minute. Yes, send that email over. She would be happy to share some info with you. Thank you all for attending today. We're going to go ahead and close out. We look forward to seeing Laura next month as well as you all. So have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next month. All right.
Bye,
Thank you
everyone.
guys. Bye.